Hello, I am Peter Colvin. I am the treasurer and a director of the Princeton Museum of Innovation and Leadership.
Located in Princeton, New Jersey.
Our goal is to utilize the lessons from innovators and great minds of the past in order to, in the present, to instruct the youth of today from elementary school to high school on how to be ethical leaders in technology. So today we're going to have a discussion around the ethics of AI uses in medicine, benefits, the drawbacks. I have here with me Rebekah Adams, who is a Carnegie Mellon Ph.D. candidate. And I have worked with Rebekah in the past before, and I know that she is able to engage in difficult conversations with poise and great thought. I also have with me Kimon Vogt. We met at a Harvard VC event hosted in Cambridge. He's former head teaching fellow at Harvard University and a Harvard Venture Spark grant recipient and startup founder up in Boston. So to start off this conversation, I want to ask Kimon a couple questions about his company and kind of where it's headed to, what it's doing. So first, what problem are you trying to resolve?
Yeah, Peter, I'm really happy that I'm here today with you. What we do at Sporo Health is we try to automate the clinical workflow, and we're really laser focused on one specific feature. We realize that physicians and clinicians in general spend a lot of time, and that's patient chart reviews. By automating that process, we can free up to 2 hours out of their day. And what that means, to just give a little bit of context to people that are not from the medicine, the medical space, is that physicians and clinicians usually go into the database of the patient, like the so-called electronic health record, and they look through the patient chart before they even interact with the patient, in order for them to know their medications, their past history, like any surgeries they had. And that takes them anywhere between 5 to 30 minutes from the interviews we have done. And there's also studies online suggesting the same thing. And it's usually a really manual task where they do a lot of clicks around the electronic health record and they try to find information. So what we do is we're automating that process, and we create a synopsis for them in order to have really quickly exactly what they need in front of their eyes, and they can spend more time with the patient.
Okay. And what benefits does this really provide to the patients and doctors?
I would say that initially the benefit that we are going for is freeing up time out of their day that they have to interact with the electronic health record, and putting that time with patients, and really allowing them to focus more on interacting with the patient.
Okay, fantastic. And how are you using machine learning or AI in your startup? And what value add does that have?
Yeah, no, great question. So the value add that we see there is that there's a lot of data in this databases thing, that every time you have a patient have an interaction with a clinician, there is a medical note that is generated and put it into this data, this electronic health record, this database. So imagine if you're 60 or 40 years old, there's so many medical notes and so many data within there. And what we know about ML, machine learning, is that it's really good in working with data, right? So there's a massive amount of data, and there is kind of a filtering out process that right now is being done manually by the physician, but ML can really be applied there in this filtering process of taking a lot of information and just eliminating what is see a really concise synopsis of what is relevant for the chief concern, for why the patient is coming in today, and the specialty of the doctor at that current moment.
Okay. And would this be possible without machine learning?
I would say that it will be really hard to try to do any other kind of software to automate the process. ML would be much better on it, especially because of all these unique cases and all these different synopsis and different ways that physicians are operating throughout their day, and how exactly they want their information to be served to them. It will be really hard to create a generalized software that can create this synopsis without using ML.
Okay, understood. And as a startup founder, some of our listeners are going to be young people who might want to be a startup founder someday. what ethical considerations do you keep in mind when you're going about this?
So, especially when we talk about healthcare, there is a lot of ethical considerations with the data privacy of like the patients. Like there is like HIPAA laws, and there's like also like the security levels that have to be really like kept, and really like there is really high considerations of how you can like reserve this privacy for the patient.
Understood. Rebekah, I was going to ask about kind of your experiences in academia using machine learning and AI, especially as it relates to any medical applications. What's been your experience learning machine learning techniques in general?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for inviting me here, and it's good to hear from you, Kimon. That's really insightful, actually, because I think that's an important process in healthcare systems. In terms of my actual experience when it comes to applying machine learning in my research in academia, I haven't formally implemented anything yet, but one of the things that I was going to work on in the past when I was working with DNA nanotechnology, which is one of the new paradigms in nanoscale drug delivery, in my opinion. I discussed with my collaborator the possibility of using artificial neural network models to investigate the impact of certain parameters or aspects that would enhance the ability for DNA nanostructure mediated gene delivery. And it was kind of centered around a paper from Dr. Metin Siti. I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but he's currently the director of physical intelligence department at the Max Planck Institute for Intelligence Systems. So that's pretty interesting. But his paper looked at particularly pegylated chitosan particles, and particularly what parameters could influence the gene delivery of those nanoparticles. So that was pretty neat. And I was particularly looking at how we could translate the experimental data that I was gathering from HEX cells, which is the perfect cell model for transfection studies, and translating them into, let's say, said ANN model. For now, where things stand, I aim to use, let's say, machine learning in the optimization techniques for medical systems, and maybe in the future energy systems, but that's another topic, as I see that they could be used for closed feedback loop and optimization techniques that could further elucidate some parameters that would play a role in said systems.
Okay. And so in your experience and what you've seen from your professors and other people, what are some of the benefits and drawbacks towards applying AI for medical research?
Right. That's a good question. I think this response may age poorly as we see more regulation come out in terms of use in AI in medical research, but I'll share some thoughts right now. So I guess in terms of benefits, I think it's extremely useful for streamlining some research tasks. One of the biggest aspects I see is automating data analysis, especially when it comes to molecular dynamic data analysis for chemical or protein dynamics. That sort of thing, which would be useful for therapeutic synthesis. Another thing is also improving time efficiency, being extremely resourceful, allowing for open source use, which is something that is also important, in my opinion, an important trend in medical research, because it allows for more transparency as to what data is being used in improving or creating these AI models. In terms of drawbacks, I think for now, we're still trying to figure out where to best use said models, which is okay. It's part of the learning curve when it comes to new technologies. But I remember one of the issues I discussed with a friend who worked at a cancer therapeutic startup was the lack of proper interpretation. Sometimes these models could be created in a black box or interpreted in a black box, and we miss out on some of the crucial physics of the system. So let's say with proteomics, we may miss out on aspects of biochemistry or physical chemistry, and how that would allow us to best interpret the output of the data we're getting. We also live in an era where we have large data sets, so we also need a way to best understand how to process it. So we're still trying to learn how to best do that, and that's okay, but that's one of the drawbacks. Let's see, there are additional drawbacks in terms of course, generating false data or writing papers, but that is also another discussion. But I think for the most part, interpretability and in research is the biggest thing, because we want to create a sense of trust when it comes to using AI in research, and that's one of the things that we need to address.
Okay. And when you're using tools like this, what ethical considerations do you keep in mind as someone in academia?
Yeah. So in terms of ethical considerations, I could first start with the technical aspects. I think there's always a pipeline that we need to keep in mind between the experimentalist or let's say the simulationist or simulation researcher and the user that is actually creating or the developer that's actually creating the model. So from the experimentalist side, we had to make sure that we, let's say through a design of experiments or other considerations, that we address some of the parameters that we're looking in certain experiments. For instance, the type of cell model we'll use, type of materials that we'll use, etc. This also means like creating a controlled experiment as well. So going back to the scientific method, we always want to make sure that we're addressing some sort of question, making sure that we have some positive, negative controls, etc. And then when it comes to actually using the data to train the ML model, we have to make sure that we clean up the data and we address some statistical biases, even before training the model itself, which also, correct me if I'm wrong, involves several other tests as well. So those are the big things I could think of. I could address more specific ethical considerations later on in terms of, let's say, the types of models or cell models we could use, for instance, as there could be disparities in terms of the sex of the cell, or let's say if you're considering more human-based studies, what is the not only sex but also race, etc., at the age, etc., that could play a role in the, let's say, behavior of immune cells and how that can influence our data set. So those are some general things to keep in mind when it comes to ML in medical research.
Understood. No, thank you for the context. Now I'm going to pivot a little bit. There is an American Medical Association article sort of on this topic. It's about, well, really a statement from them on advancing healthcare AI through ethics, evidence, and equity. And they had an interesting perspective. There was a graphic on there discussing sort of the responsibility for different phases, AI planning and development and implementation. And they sort of split the roles the different people take in between developer, deployer, and the physician, and sort of the responsibilities in each of these stages. So I wanted to kind of have an open discussion with both of you and in between each other about, whether we could each, what do you think about the general principles of this article and this division of roles and responsibilities? And is it misplaced? Do you think that they have something valuable there?
Yeah, I can start. By the way, Rebekah, you touched on great points, and one of the things that I wanted to iterate also, on regarding the article, is the interpretability, right? Especially when we are talking about AI in the medical space, it's really important to know how these decisions was made if you go to trust an AI algorithm to make decisions for you. So I would say that we are still in the first phase of using AI in the healthcare space. And this first phase can really not be at the point where we can trust the algorithm without human intervention, right? So I really believe that this point can come in the future, but for now, the best applications in the healthcare space for AI would be on supporting tools, like clinical support decision tools, where the algorithm will even automate some process or help the physician do things faster. But in the end of the day, it will be the physician will be the final, or the clinician will be the final decision maker, and the one that have to review and be held reliable for the output and the outcome. And I do think that these have to be made clear, especially in this first phase, because the developers can do their best and create guidelines and talk about how the software should be used, but it's in the hands of the physician to use it the right way, as it is like when, like when we, for example, totally different thing, but like when you create like a knife for the kitchen, a kitchen knife, right? Like there's a lot of ways you can use it, but like the real reason why kitchen knives exist is like to like cook, right? So it's like, the liability goes really on the user, and the user in that case will be the physicians.
I think that's a very interesting perspective. And actually, when I read this article, I did think about what you're doing, Kimon. So I was like, this is great that they're actually talking about some of the ways to actually use AI to improve patient care, because that's something that should be emphasized more. I also agree with actually the prospect that we had to take care in terms of how we best introduce AI systems, because we want to build trust in terms of patients actually using the models, especially in a or clinical setting, and the role of physician when it comes to that. I think my interpretation of the framework was that these models would also be directly from the developer to the patient, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So I would say that with regards to aspects of planning and developing the model, I certainly agree with the patient's role. I do think that it is also very important for them to outline clear, let's say, ways to address some biases or to identify some problems that would be useful for a developer. So in the beginning stages, we could create some sort of feedback loop. That way, when someone's actually developing said technology, one could say in their mind, I'm serving X population, X needs, etc. I think there's more value if the developer also chats with the patients and see, okay, what are the X problems and X needs that I need to address? But that's just my opinion for now. But I thought that was really important. In terms of data usage, of course, the need for more data from patients is also required, but I think that also falls on the level of engagement. This goes in the more the realm of, let's say, clinical studies, for instance. Like, how do you engage someone to do or participate in clinical studies, especially if there's, let's say, a lack of trust in using AI models? But that's a whole separate discussion. But I think for now, just having a framework in place where there's some transparency and communication between the developer and the user is a first step that at least the infographic addresses to some degree.
Yeah, I totally agree with Rebekah. And I would say that that's what we do also at Sporo Health. We have this first phase of piloting where we will have like feedback loops with the physicians and iterating through the product. We will be like really focused on doing a feedback based development where like we really listening to how the product is working, and also creating this clinical data to create KPIs and like accuracy matrices to provide this reassurance of how the algorithm is performing. And I would say that like it's such a new era that is expanding so fast right now, like especially with like LLMs, like large language models, and like applying them in the healthcare space, where like exactly as Rebekah said, like there is so much, like the physicians are still trying, and the clinicians in general are still a little bit hesitant on using it. And one of the main reasons I would say is because there isn't really good accuracy and performance matrices out there to show how those algorithms are performing. Like going beyond the interpretability of like why the algorithm like really outputted that specific decision. It's also about matrices on like performing, right? And this is something that is still like under like a lot of interest and a lot of research. And even like we at Sporo Health, we have find a way to create some matrices to show how, or like synopsis feature will be working, and kind of like provide like a little bit more reinsurance about the AI space in the healthcare.
Sorry, Kimon, I actually do have a quick question because now I'm curious. So how many people currently are you reaching out to, let's say, test the system, or what institutions are you reaching out to test the system? And how do you address the engagement aspect of further monitoring and improving said systems? If I hope I
no,
question clear.
This is great. So I would say that initially, until like this point, we had 15 physicians that was using or let's say MVP, like the minimum viable product, and they was providing us feedback. There was mainly physicians in hospital settings in the Boston area, and they was doing it outside of their work time without like using real data of patients, right? Because we wasn't like HIPAA audited at that point. But like right now, we are in the process of becoming HIPAA and SOC 2, like go through the audits for HIPAA and SOC 2. And we are having 5 private practices and clinics that we will be operating or software within them. And one of the clear asks is that during the pilot study, they have to edit every synopsis that is generated for them. So every time we take this data, filtering them and create the synopsis for them, they still have to do this manual patient chart review, and they still have to like find their own informations and then see what is missing from our synopsis and what is added that maybe is irrelevant for them, right? And edit it. That will really help us create this like accuracy matrix I was talking about. And this will only have to happen during the pilot studies. So, and that's like a really key aspect of for phase 1 at Sporo Health. I think Rebekah, okay. we lost Rebekah probably. Are you there?
Oh, no. Okay. No, I was about to say, I was having difficulty muting for some reason. I was about to say, no, that's pretty interesting. First of all, I wish you luck in actually going into hospital and private practices, because that's one of the difficult things when it comes to clinical research. I can only imagine how it is in a more industrial landscape. So first of all, wish you luck with that. I guess, are there specific types of fields or types of like cares you're looking at, or is it general healthcare, let's say, bodies that you're looking at?
Right now, we're focusing on PCPs, so primary care physicians. And one of the main reasons is that because they're kind of the first point of touch for every patient in order to get referrals or like coming back for like after they see a specialty doctor. So they have a lot of data and for really unique cases. So like we can really make sure that a more robust approach is taken. And I would say that the decision of like going towards the outpatient setting was one of like trying to skip a little bit of the bureaucracy in the healthcare space and like move fast and really give the product to the physician's hand and see their feedback.
Oh, okay, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to think what else. Oh, sorry.
No worries. Quick question in there. Just curious, as far as we talked a little bit, kind of referring to the AMA article about the sort of physician's role as the final check and confirmation to make sure patient's health is taken care of. How have you encountered the training of physicians, right, in this new tool? What has that been like? Because physicians, right, it can be a wide variety of ages and technical proficiencies. What challenges or opportunities have you encountered there?
Yeah, I would say that one of the great things about going for private practices is that usually it's the physicians with more experience that have spent a lot of years being like in the hospital setting, and then they decide to like create their own practice, right? So they have a lot of years of experience, and that helps a lot, especially in the beginning and making sure that things like run smoothly. So I would say that there are probably most of our like pilot agreements right now are with physicians that have like years of experience. And that's where we want to like be based in the beginning, make sure that like we are working and getting feedback from physicians with like 20 plus years of experience. And Peter, did you mention any other? I think there was a second question on that part that I don't remember.
Yeah. As far as the AMA framework, was there any as far as what I was mentioning before, in regards to training the physicians to use your system, has that been difficult, easy? What have you learned from that?
Yeah, no, great question. So I would say that we have been working on it for the past like eight months now, and we have done more than 100 physician interviews, more like probably around 300 hours of like interviewing physicians. And what we realize is that so much like the burnout in the physicians is real in the US and is like exponentially growing year by the year. And they cite electronic health records as one of their main sources. That being because there was never asked how the electronic health records should be created. It was just created and then mandated to them. And they had a really hard time adjusting to a software that they never had they never had a saying on how to create it, right? So we have here again and again that that's one of the main reasons why they had electronic health records is because it wasn't created thinking about the physicians, and we really want to take a different approach. So what we are doing is we try to reduce the friction of our software and reduce the learning curve for them as much as possible. So we are fully integrated within their EHR, and it comes as as a pop-up window where they really have nothing extra to learn. It's just it's added frictionless within their already daily process, but reduces the amount of manual searching they have to do.
Understood. And there was another article that I had read recently as a review article, and it was published in Frontiers. The title is Legal and Ethical Considerations in Artificial Intelligence in Healthcare. Who takes responsibility? Kind of right back to sort of that AMA framework of deciding, hey, where do we place this? And I think they had a different perspective than AMA is why I was somewhat interested in it. There was a quote in there that said technologists should be held accountable if AIS, artificially intelligent systems, are used in a healthcare context and directly affect patients. What do you guys think about that statement? Is it kind of opposed to the AMA framework? Do you find that helpful, not helpful? I'm curious to hear your perspectives.
I can go, and then I can let Rebekah go after me. But I would say it's really okay. So I believe that having somebody taking responsibility and being held reliable when we talk about patients is super important, and it have to be mandated that somebody is being held reliable before any kind of process of applying AI into the healthcare space for decision making is even occurred. So we don't really have anything going the wrong way. That being said, what is really important here is the advertisement. It's what do you advertise that your software is doing? For example, for us at Sporo Health, and I'm going back to what we do, but we never advertise that we will replace physicians. We never advertise that we are the ones that will make the diagnostics, or we will not do the differential diagnosis for them. We will not do anything that could affect the patient, right? The only thing we are doing is improving the clinician's life with our first feature, just by automating part of the process, but still tell them that it's the first phase, and you really have to also make sure that all the relevant information are indeed there. So it's I would say it's really about making sure that you're advertising your software and what the AI model will be doing correctly, and making sure that you're held reliable as a developer up to the point of what you're saying your software will be doing.
Really quick, right? Turn it over to you, Rebekah. I think that's really interesting, and I like that because it's a little different than we've been used to software as a service, right, for several decades now, and you often see a early product shift that maybe advertised frequently more than they can actually take on, and that's kind of considered okay and reasonable in a software as a service for regular consumers or for businesses, because generally, right, you can modify it, you can add features, the consumers are okay with it, and so far the government seems to be reasonably okay with it. And I appreciate your take on it that kind of in the healthcare sector there's sort of this higher bar, sort of larger outcomes, right, than say Adobe Photoshop effects on an artist's ability to work with a picture or what have you, a video. So yeah, no, I appreciate that perspective. And Rebekah, what's your 2 cents worth?
Yeah, I was about to say I also appreciate Kimon's perspective on that. I think the advertising point was really interesting because it made me thought about kind of deviating, but using as an analogy the how some food based or consumer based companies could say like natural or like it has real fruit, but there's no regulation around the use of those words, but it is technically not true advertising, and then that could just lead to people to sue them. I think one example is like Pop Tarts or like Kellogg or something, but that's besides the point. So I think there's like an important need for that, and I'm so glad that you brought up that perspective. Because that's something that definitely needs to be discussed. So going back to the quote that you brought up in the article, Peter, I do think, and I do agree with the fact that someone should be held reliable and responsible before actually implementing these AI systems, especially in a healthcare space where privacy and the needs of the patient is highly emphasized. It's something that is emphasized through the Hippocratic Oath that pretty much every medical professional needs to remember when they're working in said medical space. I think it would actually be interesting if those who are using or developing AI systems could, let's say, understand also the ethics that medical professionals are learning. And I'm curious to see what that intersection would look like in the future. But I think that would be an interesting way to further regulate and to further emphasize the need that those who are developing the technology should also be aware of some of the ethical considerations in that space. Similar to how if you were to create a technology for another space, you understand what are the needs or ethical considerations in said space as well. So yeah, I totally agree with that. I think there needs to be some sort of framework and a need for, let's say, those who are developing AI systems to be aware of those basic ethics like the Hippocratic Oath, so that these systems are not implemented in a black box, using that term again. So pretty much I agree. I'm just adding a different perspective to it.
I appreciate that, Rebekah. I'm going to turn to, there's another little bit longer quote in the article talking about model data. And we addressed this a little bit before, but I just want to lean into it a bit. They said that models can be trained on data which contains human decisions on data that reflects the second order effects of social or historical inequities. Additionally, the way data is collected and used can also contribute to bias, and user-generated data can act as a feedback loop, causing bias. So, as scholars and innovators, how do we counteract these flaws in the data that we're given, right? We may not always collect the data. There's a lot large, databases. So how do we counteract these flaws in our collected data? And Kimon, if you want to start it off.
Yeah, I didn't want to start always, so I was like, let Rebekah first, but I will go. I would say that Rebekah touched on that a little bit earlier, and she talked about like the data, the imbalances of like the data and like how important that is, and also like the biases, right? Like, so there's a lot of things about the data, and as exactly like Rebekah said, like there is, we as developers and we as data scientists and we as like ML engineers, we have to like make sure that we do this like exploratory data analysis and this like data pre-processing, where like we really focus on understanding the data, seeing where these imbalances exist, see what kind of biases we can find, and be aware of them, right? There is this first step of making sure we do understand that there is biases, but like there's biases, there's bias in the daily life, right? Like these data are coming from people that they bring the bias into it. So it's how our world is working right now, right? So like I think like the first step is to bring the algorithms to a point where they can help us operate as we're operating right now, and then try to improve from that point on, right? So like there is like this AI agents that are coming along, right? And then there is like a lot of models like that they're kind of like cooperating together, right? And like if you think about it, like that can bring more diverse like decision making, especially like when you're talking about maybe taking one algorithm and like train it on a specific data set and take another one and train it on another data set. So like they have different biases, and like combining them together to be able to take a decision will like reduce this sort of bias. But bias will always be there because the data have been created by humans most of the times that have bias?
Well, thanks for sharing that perspective. I think I have a slightly, but maybe it's just touching upon what you said, but I have a slightly different view in the sense that in a more academic setting, the onus would always fall on the experimentalist. So, which is something I addressed earlier. Something that also you touched on earlier, Kimon, is the importance of actually spending hours or collecting hours in interacting with physicians through your pilot study, which is extremely important. So I think recognizing our own in like humanistic views of the world, as you mentioned, does play a significant role. I think going back to the experimentalist perspective, in order to address some of the imbalances that we see in data, I think that there are some needs to understand how to best perform an experiment. That is something that may not be emphasized in all spaces, at least from my observation. It tends to be emphasized more in medical research settings or more bioengineering research settings as opposed to, let's say, material science. But I think some sort of guideline as to what models or parameters to look for when it comes to actually using a platform to inform research and to gather data sets is important. I think there's also I speak again from more academic perspective, there's also a basic need to understand how to best interpret your raw data and to clean up your data and see if there are needs to improve it. So yeah, I'm looking at it from a more upstream perspective, of course. I definitely cannot speak too much on the downstream perspective where we actually use the AI systems. But I do agree. And I actually like the perspective that we should focus on bringing the models to our current understanding of the landscape and then finding ways to evolve said models into a better non-biased approach. I think ultimately, though, we're still going to have biases. We're never going to reach an absolute point in our history where we're going to have null biases or perspectives. I think that is also just part of the research process. That is also part of the way that you develop systems. But for now, I think we just need to be conscious about how we're performing said experiments or performing said clinical studies or trials or pilot studies such that we could, to the best of our ability, address that. And that actually makes us more ethical in that practice.
I like that. And I would just add that there on what Rebekah said, that even on the guidelines, like if we can create our developers a guidelines where we say, okay, our software was trained on this model that have this kind of bias that we understand, right? Like giving that along with your model will really help the user understand what kind of bias is already existing within the model.
Documentation goes a long, long ways. Always a big fan. I am not a great coder by any stretch of the imagination, but I do know this. If I don't comment up a storm and provide documentation, it gets quite ugly when I come back to it in a month or two. As we sort of come to a close, really, based on our discussion today, are there any changes or things that you would consider making towards how either of you evaluate ethical considerations going forward? And I'll turn it over to Rebekah first to switch up the order a little bit.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so in terms of changes, I think, again, speaking from more academic perspective, there's always a need to go back to the fundamentals of what you're doing. When it comes to the scientific method, making sure that you're addressing things in a controlled manner as possible and making sure you're looking at all of your variables. And at least for my needs, always performing a design of experiments to make sure what parameters are going to be important or variables or conditions are going to be important in your study. Let's say in a more bio research perspective, that means, okay, understanding what cell models will work for what study. HEC blue or just HEC cells versus, let's say, THP1 cells for immunological studies, or understanding what animal models to use, which would be best useful to translate to clinical studies. So just it's not very deep in a sense. It's more of just trying to be rigorous and going back to what we said about documentation, trying to be aware about whether or not I'm covering my basis. And then when it comes to the data analysis process, trying to be rigorous or being very rigorous when it comes to post-processing the data. That goes for image analysis, making sure there's no noise, or just large data sets that you could get from molecular dynamic simulations or even continuum models, honestly, that could provide some artifacts or statistical biases in your data set as well. All of that you have to perform before even trying to train the algorithm or automation procedure that you have set up for yourself in the research landscape that would allow you to further optimize your research process. So for me, more of improving the upstream process of the empirical or simulation analysis and the data output.
Yeah, that's great. I'd say from my side, we do put a lot of effort in the pre-processing of data and like exploratory data analysis and really looking into what data we're using and like how we use them. And we have heard again and again about like the data privacy and like we really taking serious, like we're taking this part seriously. So especially like in the PHI, like the really sensitive information for the physicians, for the patients, and we are like de-anonymizing them and everything. So I would say from this conversation today, I will definitely continue doing these movements of ensuring the security of the data, as well as really putting more effort into creating, except the documentation, but creating also like a guideline for exactly what we are providing to the physicians, and like a guideline of how is best used, and really make sure that it's like detailed and also explaining what data we're using also to them, except like having the focus on within the team to understand the data. We will also provide to them what data we are using for all these like trainings. So yeah, guidelines is advertisements, feedback loop, definitely like something that our pilots will be doing, but really emphasizing on making sure that we are taking the feedback from the human, and like the physicians are within like this process, and and just work with more like private practices with like in different geographic regions and within different settings, to make sure that like diversity is included within or output.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rebekah and Kimon, for joining me today. I know I appreciated this, and I feel like I've learned from this discussion. I hope that the listeners here have also gained something from this. If you're listening, this is Peter Colvin with the Princeton Museum of Innovation and Leadership. We're based out of Princeton, New Jersey, and we're not affiliated with the Princeton University. If you appreciated this discussion as a listener, and you want to support continuing to teach elementary through high school students on how to ethically innovate and lead in their communities, if that mission resonates with you, please visit www.princetoninnovationmuseum.org and consider donating. Also, please visit Kimon's Sporo Health and take a look at that and see if, maybe if you're a physician, reach out to him, and I am sure he would be interested in more pilot users. And Rebekah, I'm excited for what you're doing at Carnegie Mellon and continue chipping away at that research. So if any of you are wondering and watching this and not have been at Princeton, I'm a Princeton graduate myself, as is Rebekah. My garish orange and black is due to the fact that after we end this podcast, I'll be heading down to the alumni rowing luncheon. So I will be heading off to go enjoy some good food down there. Have a great Saturday, and thank you again, Kimon and Rebekah, for joining us.